What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Song of Ice and Fire video. As you all know, I am reading the books over again, but this time I have decided to make a video on each chapter. For those of you who have not read them, these videos will give you a good idea of what is happening in the books. In this video, we will be discussing Lady Catelyn's first chapter. This one begins shortly after Bran Stark's ended. In his chapter, we saw the deserter of the Night's Watch get executed, then we saw the Starks find the direwolves in the late summer snows. This chapter begins in Winterfell as Lady Catelyn walks to the Godswood to speak with her husband, Ned Stark, who is sitting under the weirwood, washing off the blood that's on his sword, Ice. Now, I know there are a lot of fans out there who do not like Lady Catelyn for various reasons, but I will say this: her first chapter is loaded with a lot of interesting information. This is when we will learn so many more fascinating details that we associate with House Stark. It is often said that the information given in the first book may reveal how this story will end. What we will see in this chapter did also happen in the Game of Thrones television show, but as always, the book version gives us so much more. Shall we begin? Like I said before, we will be looking at Lady Catelyn's first chapter. Now we will get to listen to her thoughts, as well as being able to see things unfold through her eyes. The chapter begins with her first thought. She thinks about how she does not like the Godswood in Winterfell. By now, Catelyn has been married to Ned Stark for well over a decade. She has 5 Stark children, but the way of life for House Stark can still be unsettling for Lady Catelyn. Almost everything in the north is very different than the way things were for Catelyn growing up in Riverrun. Back at Catelyn's childhood home, her Godswood was a garden that sounds like it was actually full of life. Down there, the colors were very bright and alive. There were streams of running water and massive redwoods all around. This is where birds would sing, and the air smelled like flowers. But as you all know, that is not how things are in the north. The gods of Winterfell kept a different sort of wood. The Godswood of House Stark is very dark. They have 3 acres of old forest that has been untouched for thousands of years. The Stark's Godswood smells like something is decomposing. There are no redwoods that grow here. This was a wood of sentinel trees that are armored in gray-green needles, of mighty oaks, and of ironwoods that are as old as the realm itself. The Godswood looks almost exactly as it did 8,000 years ago when House Stark was founded. Lady Catelyn thinks about all of this as she is walking into the Godswood. She thinks about their gods, the werewoods, Brandon the Builder, and the Starks of legend, as well as many other things that make House Stark so interesting. Now that we are beginning to learn about these things in the story, I want to explain why House Stark follows the old gods. You see, the blood of the first men still flows through the veins of the Starks. Based on what the books say, the Children of the Forest were a mysterious, non-human race that originally inhabited Westeros, long before the first men ever arrived. The Children of the Forest did believe that the sacred werewoods are gods, and after you die, you will become a part of them. Over 8,000 years ago is when the first men arrived in Westeros. At first, the Children of the Forest and the first men were able to coexist with one another, but that was until the first men began cutting down their sacred werewoods. The first men feared that the Children of the Forest were watching them through the eyes of the werewoods, and they did not like this, so they started to burn them and cut them down. That led to bloodshed that lasted for thousands of years. Eventually, the Children of the Forest and the first men fought to a standstill. This is when they finally agreed to coexist with one another. So they met on the Isle of Faces where they made a pact. The first men were granted the open lands, and the Children of the Forest were given the forest. Afterwards is when the Children of the Forest taught the worship of the old gods to the first men. Since the original members of House Stark were first men, this is how they begun to follow the old gods of the north. Now, most of the werewoods in the south are gone, except on the Isle of Faces, or the God's Eye, where the green men still kept their silent watch. It's very different in the north. Here every castle has its Godswood, and every Godswood had its heart tree, and every heart tree has its face. When Lady Catelyn reaches the Godswood in Winterfell, she finds her husband sitting under the weirwood, washing off the blood from his sword. Something he normally does after he takes a man's life. Lady Catelyn can feel the eyes of the weirwood following her as she approaches Ned. The first thing Ned says is, "Where are the children?" He would always ask her that. They're all inside the castle, deciding what to name their direwolves. As I have said before, it is believed that the names given to the direwolves may foreshadow the fate of the Stark children. There are many different interpretations to the names, but I will let you know what I think they mean. Little Rickon Stark names his direwolf Shaggy Dog. and what the definition of this word basically says, it's a story that will lead nowhere. It may be funny to the author, but it could be seen as boring or meaningless to the reader. This sounds somewhat accurate based on what happened to Rickon in the Game of Thrones show. Now, I don't believe his journey will end the same in the books, but I also don't think it will have a major impact on the overall story either. Bran Stark ends up naming his direwolf Summer. He is the last one to give his direwolf a name, and he does this right after he wakes up from his coma. Well, right before Bran wakes up, he is visited by the three-eyed crow in his dream. During that dream, Bloodraven shows Bran many different things. He needs Bran to understand just how important he actually is. One of the last things he shows Bran is what lies in the far north, in the lands of always winter. Bloodraven takes Bran deep into the heart of winter, and shows him that winter is coming for all of us. This is when Bran wakes up, and he says Summer. He wants to name his direwolf Summer. We know that Bran will be instrumental in the defeat of the White Walkers, assuming they win in the books. He will have to assist in ending the new long night, ushering in a new summer, hence the name he gave his direwolf. Arya names her direwolf Nymeria, named after a historical figure she admires. Nymeria is famously known for leading the Rhoynar to Dorne, and as you all know, Arya's Nymeria ends up leading a pack of direwolves. Arya and Nymeria also have a very similar journey throughout the story. They are driven from their home, and they spend many years bouncing around from location to location. Robb Stark names his direwolf Grey Wind because he's fast like the wind. In a sense, I suppose you could say the same thing about Robb. He had to become a man almost immediately. When his father was held captive, Robb had to gather the banners and take the fight to House Lannister, leading to many fast victories for House Stark. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Unfortunately, Robb and his direwolf Grey Wind both had their heads removed. As you all know, Sansa names her direwolf Lady, something Sansa always wanted to be. When Ned has to execute Lady, I believe a part of Sansa dies as well. Sansa once thought that everything was all sunshine and rainbows, but the death of Lady certainly made her look at things a bit differently. And in order for Sansa to survive, she would have to do some things that were not so ladylike, which is understandable. The last direwolf to be found was Jon's, who he named Ghost, because he's all white and very silent. As of right now in the books, Jon Snow is still dead, making him a ghost in a sense, but Jon's ghost may live on inside of his direwolf Ghost, if even only for a short amount of time. Alright, so after Catelyn tells Ned the children are inside thinking of names for their direwolves, she mentions how Rickon is a little afraid of his direwolf. Remember, Rickon is only 3 years old at the time. Ned says Rickon must learn to face his fears. He will not be 3 forever, and winter is coming. The Stark's house words give Lady Catelyn a chill, as they always did. Every noble house has its words, family mottos that boast of honor and glory, or swore of faith and courage, except for House Stark. Their words were only, winter is coming. This is something Catelyn sits here and reflects on. This is what makes her chapter so interesting. It's loaded with all these little details about House Stark. All of this history we learn about the North will have a major impact on the story once more information is revealed about the White Walkers. Like I said in one of my last videos, I believe the books will show us just how close of a connection the Starks have to the White Walkers in the end. Just look at everything that has been shown to us so far. In the first chapter, we are introduced to the White Walkers. Then in the next chapter, we are introduced to Bran Stark, who will be instrumental in the defeat of the White Walkers. Then, in Lady Catelyn's chapter, we learn all this other information about Winterfell, House Stark, the Old Gods, the Werewoods, the Children of the Forest, Ned Stark's sword Ice, and all these other things that will directly connect to the battle against the White Walkers, and ultimately how this story will end, in my opinion. Now, right after Catelyn reflects on how strange the House Stark's words are, she immediately begins to think about the Stark's house sword Ice. This is when we learn something very interesting about their sword, which is something I talked about in a recent video. The sword that Ned Stark has is 400 years old, but the sword's name is way older than that. The Starks have been naming their house sword Ice ever since the Age of Heroes during the Long Night. You can see how they have all these various connections to the White Walkers. The White Walkers have swords that are actually made out of ice, whereas the Starks have a sword named Ice. The White Walkers, at least in the show, have a Night King from the lands of always winter, and the Starks of legend were known as the Kings of Winter. When the White Walkers first invaded, it was said that a horrible winter fell, and as you all know, the name of the Starks' castle is Winterfell. These little connections are endless. Alright, so now Ned starts to talk about the man he just executed. He says something made the man half mad. Something made this man leave the Night's Watch, knowing it would mean his execution. Ned says he tried to talk to this man, but he was so afraid his words could not move him. Then Ned says his brother Benjen told him the Night's Watch has less than 1,000 men. Not only because of desertions, but also because men are dying out beyond the wall. We are almost immediately made aware of their low numbers. That could be seen as the foreshadowing for them not being able to defend the wall against an attack. They simply do not have enough men, and Westeros is made aware of this from the very beginning. Now this is a ticking time bomb ready to explode. All the White Walkers have to do is attack the wall in full force. The Night's Watch will not be able to stop them on their own. As of right now, Ned believes it's the wildlings killing all of the men out beyond the wall. This is when Ned says, "The day may come when I will have no choice but to call the banners and ride north to deal with this king beyond the wall for good and all." The thought made Catelyn shudder in fear. Ned attempts to reassure her when he says, Mance Rayder is nothing for them to fear, but Catelyn says, there are darker things out beyond the wall. When she says that, she looks at the werewood's face and thinks about its red eyes, watching, listening, thinking its long, slow thoughts. Ned Stark refuses to believe the White Walkers are real, but his wife knows better than that. Ned attempts to dismiss her when he says she listens to too many of Old Nan's stories. He says the White Walkers are gone, just like the Children of the Forest. They have been gone for 8,000 years. Maester Luwin says they never lived at all. No living man has ever seen them. But Lady Catelyn comes right back at him and slam dunks in his face when she says no living man had ever seen a direwolf south of the wall either, until this morning. This is when Ned changes the subject. Checkmate, Lady Catelyn. So, then Ned says, why did you really come out here? He knows she does not like their Godswood, so she must have a good reason to be there. Catelyn says, I am sorry, my love. Jon Arryn is dead. The news devastated him, as she knew it would. When he was only a child, Ned had fostered at the Eyrie, and the childless Jon Arryn had become like a second father to him and his fellow ward, Robert Baratheon. This is when Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon acted more like brothers than friends. They grew up together at the Eyrie, under the guidance of Lord Jon Arryn. This is also why the death of Jon Arryn affected Ned and Robert so much. They saw him as a father. Then, years later, Ned and Jon Arryn became brother-in-laws when Ned married Catelyn, and Jon married her sister Lysa. Jon Arryn also did something else that showed just how much he loved Ned and Robert. You see, after Lyanna and Rhaegar went missing, Ned's brother, Brandon, rode to King's Landing in search of Rhaegar Targaryen. He was demanding to see Rhaegar to answer for his sister's abduction, but Rhaegar wasn't there. The Mad King had Brandon Stark arrested for threatening his son's life. Then, sometime shortly after that, their father, Rickard Stark, was summoned to the Red Keep, where he was then arrested as well. He demanded a trial by combat. The Mad King responded by choosing fire as his champion. Rickard was hung on the rafters with chains over a burning fire. His son, Brandon, was given a choice. If he could reach out to the sword laying on the ground, he could free his father. However, he had a chain tied around his neck and the sword was out of reach. Brandon Stark strangulated himself to reach out to the sword while his father, Rickard, was roasted alive in his armor. This sounds like something you would see in one of those Saw movies. Afterwards, the Mad King demanded Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon's heads. He wanted to execute them before they could gather up forces and retaliate. But Jon Arryn was not about to hand them over. He raised his own banners instead, rebelling against the crown. Jon Arryn was loyal until the very end, and I'm sure this is one of the many reasons why Robert Baratheon made him the Hand of the King. Now, as sad as Ned was, he showed more concern for his wife Catelyn and her family. He wanted to make sure Lysa and her son Robin were alright. By now, they have already left King's Landing heading for the Eyrie. This concerns Catelyn because she doesn't want Lysa to be by herself. This is also when we find out that Catelyn's uncle, the Blackfish, was already in the Vale. Jon Arryn had made him the Knight of the Gate. Make sure you remember that for later. This is when Ned tries to convince Catelyn to go to the Vale to be with her sister. He says Lysa's son needs to be around other children. Go be with her, and fill her halls with noise and shouts and laughter. But Catelyn informs Ned that she cannot leave Winterfell just yet. Robert Baratheon is already on his way. He is riding to Winterfell to speak with Ned immediately. This news does make Ned feel better. Catelyn notices the sadness leave his face, and you might not believe this, but Ned actually smiles when he finds out Robert is on his way. This also just goes to show you how much Ned loves Robert. He is very anxious to see his old friend again. He sends Jory to meet them so he can escort them the rest of the way. This makes me kinda sad when I think about it because Ned was so excited to see Robert again, but we all know what this reunion will lead to. Even Catelyn wanted to express her happiness with him, but she knew something wasn't right about all of this. She remembers what she heard about the dead direwolf lying in the snow. She is afraid of what this means. The direwolf and the stag are the sigils of House Stark and Baratheon, and they were both found dead in the snow. Now a Baratheon is on his way to see a Stark. Lady Catelyn must wonder what this means for her family. We already know. Now the rest of this chapter basically just talks about who might be coming with Robert Baratheon. This is when Ned finds out that all the Lannister children are on their way as well. We find out that Ned has a major issue with House Lannister, but more specifically, he does not like Tywin or Jaime Lannister. You see, when Ned and Robert were fighting to remove the Mad King from the Iron Throne, the Lannisters waited until victory was all but certain before they decided to show up. Ned has never forgiven them for that. Lady Catelyn reminds Ned that he better watch his mouth around Cersei. She says the Lannister woman is our queen, and her pride is said to grow with every passing year. The dysfunctional relationship between the Starks and the Lannisters is set up right away. So far, each chapter has done a great job at advancing the plot. It's becoming more and more obvious that House Stark has booked a one-way ticket headed straight for a disaster. What I love about this Catelyn chapter is how it gives us more insight into the history of the Starks, as well as revealing some bits of information about the different relationships Ned has with other characters in the story. In my next chapter video, we will finally meet Daenerys Targaryen. I would love to see you all come back for that video. Also, I want to mention something before I leave. I will be uploading some reaction videos to my Patreon very soon. Some of you might actually be surprised to hear this, but I have never seen the Lord of the Rings movies. So what I want to do is record my reaction to watching those movies for the first time, and I should be able to upload my reaction to the full movie on Patreon without having to worry about any copyright strikes. If some of you show up and like those videos, then I will keep making them for other movies and shows that we all like. So if you're interested in watching something like that, consider supporting me over on Patreon. I would really appreciate that. Either way, I want to thank you for watching this video. I am making a lot of different videos right now, so I will be seeing you again very soon. Have a great day. Bye.